Rohingya repatriation, the agreement that could lead to their return to Myanmar, but there are many unanswered questions. Anxious moments, grief-stricken families waiting for news of that missing submarine with their loved ones on board, and preparing to fly in unfriendly skies. CNN takes to the air over South Korea with a US F-16 pilot. Thanks for your company, everyone. I'm Michael Holmes. AMRA's off today. Welcome to CNN Today. And our top story this hour, Myanmar touting a deal with Bangladesh to repatriate Rohingya refugees, calling it a win-win situation for both countries. It's a memorandum of understanding. It was inked in on Thursday, but we have no real detail on how this process will work. And that is raising all kinds of questions, concerns and doubts. For example, how many of the more than 600,000 refugees will be allowed to return? Where will they be resettled, given that many of their villages were razed? And how will their safety be ensured when they weren't safe in the first place? Rohingya have been pouring into Bangladesh from Myanmar's Rakhine state since late August, telling harrowing tales of murder, rape and arson.
I don't trust the Myanmar government. My husband left 3 times, and this is my 2nd time to leave. The Myanmar government is always like this.
We will go back to our country if our demands are met. Our demands are that we are given citizenship. They also have to give us back our land.
We will go back if they don't harass us and if we can live life like the Buddhists and other ethnic minorities. Our educated children should get government jobs like the others.
And senior international correspondent Ivan Watson is covering this story for us. He filed an update from Hong Kong.
After months of immense suffering, allegations of appalling atrocities, as well as the exodus of more than 600,000 Rohingya Muslims across the border from Myanmar to neighboring Bangladesh, now government officials from both countries have announced an agreement for the repatriation of these refugees. We don't have a time frame yet. We don't have real details about how this could be implemented. But this is a sign of a step towards both governments trying to come to some resolution of this crisis. Now, it's not clear also what fresh diplomatic pressure from the U.S. government, what role that may have played in pushing both governments to announcing this repatriation agreement. For the first time, the U.S. Secretary of State has used very tough language against the Myanmar government over this crisis. Rex Tillerson issuing a statement that said, quote, "These abuses by some among the Burmese military, security forces, and local vigilantes have caused tremendous suffering and forced hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children to flee their homes in Burma to seek refuge in Bangladesh." He went on to say, "It's clear that the situation in northern Rakhine state constitutes ethnic cleansing against the Rohingya." The Myanmar government has flatly denied accusations that its security forces have engaged in what one U.S. State Department official described as systematic, planned, and organized ethnic cleansing. If there's going to be a repatriation program, implementation will be key. Will traumatized people dare to go back to their home villages, some of which have been burned? Will any of them have any documentation left to prove that they once lived in Myanmar? And the agreement, it's not clear whether it will get to the crux of the crisis, which is that historically the Myanmar government refuses to recognize the citizenship, the citizen rights of this community of Rohingya Muslims, denying them access to health care, education, and even the rights to travel freely within the borders of that country. Ivan Watson, CNN, Hong Kong.
Well, the Argentine Navy has just given its latest update in the search for the missing submarine with 44 crew on board. Journalist Stefano Pozzebon joining us now from Mar del Plata. Obviously, everybody's worried. Hope is running out. What did you hear at this update?
Michael, the Navy, as you said, updating the search sheets, saying that hope is urging people to keep the hopes alive, and saying that they're not running out of they're not taking any options out of the table until they find with certain confirmation about the whereabouts of the San Juan, the submarine that has been missing for well over a week now. It was a week and a day ago that it last made contact with its own base here in Mar del Plata, where I'm standing. And this morning we received the news that the Navy had detected a noise that was, and I quote, consistent with an explosion in the area where the San Juan lost contact on that fatidic day, the 15th of November. Now, the Navy is urging to keep the optimism and the hopes alive, and it's still talking about a search that is still on, and saying that they're still doing their best to find those 44 crew members. But that optimism, Michael, is not shared by many of the relatives who are here in the Mar del Plata base, and who were hopeful to hug them and to welcome their relatives, the crew members of the San Juan. That optimism is not shared with them, and this morning we were able to speak with one of them, and here is what they had to say. Have a listen.
No nos quedó santo por rezar, no nos quedó a nadie por pedir, pero bueno, no sé si hay un destino marcado para cada uno, hay gente que no cree en eso, pero bueno, no volvieron y no van a volver nunca más, y no sé si van a volver sus cuerpos, y es lo que más me duele.
Se roban la plata a los jefes, por eso son un hijo de... Mataron a mi hermano porque lo sacan con alambre a navegar, hijo. Yo estuve en la armada. Fueron esos, hijo de...
As you can see, Michael, some of these relatives have already starting to lose hope, are starting to come to terms with the reality and with the most tragic news that are probably going to hear in their lives. Despite this, the Navy is still saying that the search is still on for the San Juan here in Mar del Plata. Michael.
All right, thanks for your reporting there, Stefano Pozzebon there in Argentina for us. Joining us now via Skype from San Diego in California is former U.S. Navy diver, author and submarine expert William Craig Reed. Thanks for being with us. The description of this explosion, I mean, what does that sound like to you? What could cause that?
There could be any number of reasons for that explosion. As we recall from August 2000, the Russian submarine Kursk, there were two explosions they heard within a few minutes of each other. One was most likely a torpedo exploding, and the second one was a cadre of torpedoes exploding from that. So we just don't know at this point. There's any number of reasons. They might have been snorkeling and one of the diesel engines had an explosion, or any number of factors. It's just too early to determine what might have been the cause.
Right, and if it wasn't an explosion, you know, time surely running out. They could have lasted, I think, 7 or 8 days. We're now at that point. I suppose it depends if they're on the bottom or not. I mean, what could they do in that situation to conserve oxygen?
Well, they do have ways to do that. There are obviously some things aboard that could help reduce the amount of carbon dioxide, some chemicals and so forth that most submarines do carry. Also, limit their movement. Some may be asked to lie down so they are breathing less. At this point, most likely the batteries have been depleted, and so they are in darkness except for flashlights. And I'm sure huddled together and hoping and praying for the best.
You know, you just cannot help but think of what it would be like for the men and one woman on that sub. And, you know, don't want to dwell on that either, but speak to what it takes to be a submariner, the psychology involved in being down there for days, weeks on end.
Yes, I have interviewed dozens of submariners for the books I've written. One in particular was the submarine that actually involved in some espionage missions during the Cold War. They were trapped on the ocean floor. This was the USS Seawolf for 4 days. They were trapped and thought they would not be able to get out. And those submariners, of course, many of them were frightened, but they are highly trained. And I have the utmost respect and admiration for anyone who served aboard submarines, regardless of the country. And I'm sure these submariners are facing this danger with a lot of courage.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary stuff. Thank you so much for being with us, William Craig Reid. Just a tragic situation all round. You can still hope, I suppose. Thank you very much. Well, in the coming days, Zimbabwe's former vice president will officially replace the man who fired him. Emmerson Mnangagwa, on the right of your screen there, is set to become interim president. But the country's opposition leader warns he might not be any better than his predecessor.
At the same time, he knows that he cannot continue on the same path Mugabe has traveled and still expect the nation to respect him. Constitutionally, elections can be held no later than August. And I hope that Emmerson Mnangagwa, completing the term of Mugabe, will stick to those constitutional path.
Meanwhile, the military, which of course helped force out the long-time leader, Robert Mugabe, says he and his wife have been granted immunity. That's despite his reluctant resignation earlier this week. Immunity does allow the Mugabes to stay in the country, gives them that guarantee of safety. Mugabe's legacy includes massive unemployment and a shattered economy, and that is raising questions about whether life will improve under Mnangagwa. Well, Faisal Enzo spoke to people in a township who say what they're getting is, quote, different feet but the same shoes, and they're beginning to voice their wishes for their country.
This is Highfields, one of Harare's oldest townships. Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo, the founding fathers of the ruling ZANU-PF, have lived here. Now it's a stronghold for Morgan Tsvangirai's opposition party, the Movement for Democratic Change. And life here is about survival. The jobs are informal. Mechanics, market women, barbers, and a great deal of unemployed youths hustling.
It's now a traditionally opposition area, Highfields. This is, remember, where Robert Mugabe's people did Operation Murambachina, which means clear out the filth. And they razed people's houses on the pretext that they didn't have planning permission. But the aim really was to smash the newly formed Movement for Democratic Change, the opposition's support base, which is all over here.
They are taken by the government.
Maxwell is one of those who had his home destroyed in 2005.
How's he?
The father of three used to be a bank manager. Now, he, like so many others, has no job.
Surely you've suffered enough. All these years. I've been working in the bank for 19 years as a manager. I've got 2 degrees, but I've done nothing to do. I'm loitering around.
He is desperate for a chance to vote for change, freely and fairly.
We must have both of them, Mnangagwa, Tsvangirai. They must come together, work together, bring the reforms for election, for a proper election to be done. If an election is held now, it's unfair.
Unfair because people are so euphoric that right now incoming President Emmerson Mnangagwa has the edge. The boys at the barbershop are optimistic. In fact, Nyasha, George, Mayesa and Artwell can't even believe they are allowed to speak to us.
You say in the Mugabe era, if they'd been seen like this, they would have been beaten up for talking to us.
It's only that people wanted change. Yeah. So it's their view that things will change because they wanted change.
You know what? Ruling Zimbabwe right now it seems to be a bit simpler. Why? You just correct the mistakes of this old man.
And then everything is back to normal.
Yes. Yeah.
These schoolgirls tell us they also believe the future is suddenly brighter with Robert Mugabe's departure. Still, it's in areas like these, poor, ignored and proud, where the real test of change will be measured.
Let's come to election, we choose a new president who will make things well. Yeah, I think it's okay that way. For the meantime, Viva Zimbabwe.
And that's what you get at the moment, Michael. You get a great deal of euphoria and goodwill by Zimbabweans to the nation of Zimbabwe. Like that young man said, in the meantime, Viva Zimbabwe. And of course, another point of view, which even Morgan Tsvangirai repeated, is that it will be simple to rule this country as long as the new man does not repeat the old man's mistakes.
And of course, Morgan Tsvangirai also calling for elections to be held when they're due next year. How likely is that? Any reason they would not happen? And what are the hopes that they would be free and fair?
Well, this is a many sort of faceted question. I mean, if I were Mr. Mnangagwa, riding on this wave of popularity, everybody feeling free and be able to talk, I haven't seen a single policeman. The cars haven't been stopped. There's been no weird bribes going on. If I were him and were to call for an election as soon as 2018 comes around the corner, I feel I would win. But of course, we don't know. ZANU-PF is a long-running, long-ruling party which always preempts decisions to try and win election come what may. And an interesting point, Michael, is that this will be the first time, if Mr. Mnangagwa goes for these elections in 2018, and if he does win, it will be his first election victory. He has suffered defeat in the local polls as a member of parliament for Gweru, his hometown, a couple of times, and he was only a minister because those positions were conferred on him by Robert Mugabe. So it will be a very interesting year, 2018, for Zimbabwe. And of course, we wait to see if this goodwill towards him, if this euphoria, this ecstasy over a new dispensation will continue with the Zimbabwean people, Michael.
Farai Sevenzo, a Zimbabwean witnessing history in his country this past week. Good to see you, Farai. Thanks so much. And ahead here on CNN Today, accounts of interrogations, intimidation and torture. We'll look at China's alarming crackdown on dissent. And one day after this incredible video of a North Korean soldier's daring escape, another defector tells CNN about the conditions he escaped. His story coming up. A prominent Chinese human rights lawyer was sentenced to 2 years in prison this week after confessing to inciting subversion. His wife told CNN her husband's confession could only be the result of torture. He's one of hundreds of lawyers and activists targeted in the crackdown on dissent that began after Xi Jinping took power. CNN spoke to 3 men who were detained and who recount daily interrogations, intimidation and torture. Matt Rivers reports.
He looks tired, on the cusp of defeat. Broadcast on state media, respected human rights lawyer Jiang Tianyong confesses to inciting subversion of state power. On Tuesday, a court sentenced him to 2 years in prison. Half a world away, living in political asylum in California, his wife, Jean Bianling, watched in disbelief. He must have been horribly tortured, she told CNN. Tortured because there is no way, Jean says, that his confession is real. He used to tell me, if I ever admit to a crime like this, it means I've been tortured. In custody for nearly a year now, Jiang Tianyong's story is not unique in today's China. Activists say President Xi Jinping has overseen a campaign of increased suppression on human rights advocates and those lawyers who represent them in court on cases that range from defending labor rights to religious freedom. Since July 2015, hundreds of lawyers and activists in the small, tight-knit human rights community have been arrested in what's become known as the largest such crackdown in decades. Among those arrested, Sui Mu-ching. We met him in secret at a Beijing apartment. They arrested me at midnight, before dawn, he says. For me, this is kidnapping. Picked up on charges of, quote, endangering state security, he says he was held in a windowless room for nearly 5 months. No TV, no books, no contact with the outside world, with guards in the room watching him 24 hours a day, including when he used the bathroom. Daily interrogation sessions lasted hours, he said. After 1 month, they forbid me from sleeping for 4 days and nights. By the 5th day, I felt like I was going to die. He says he only confessed after he was threatened with being chained from the ceiling with a strobe light hung in front of his eyes. Famous Chinese dissident artist Ai Weiwei says he was held in similar conditions for 81 days in 2011. He detailed his experience in this music video. The Chinese government can hold people for up to 6 months in what activists call legalized black jails, completely cut off from their families and lawyers. Activists argue that because these facilities exist outside the regular prison system, abuse and torture is more rampant. We asked the Chinese government about these specific allegations in our story, but they did not reply to our request for comment. The government has regularly said in the past that it does not torture prisoners. Beijing maintains these activists are criminals, dealt with under the law. One activist pointed us to one so-called black jail where he was held in the southwestern city of Guilin.
And to be honest, we didn't know what to expect when we were walking up here, but around here it is relatively quiet. That's an unassuming building, but it does belie what activists say goes on inside.
The activist said he was kept here for weeks with little sleep and no access to the outside world, and his family had no idea where he was. The government denied that this was a detention facility. Foreign activists have been subjected to this crackdown too. Swedish human rights advocate Peter Dahlin was held for 3 weeks in a different facility and says he only confessed to, quote, inciting opposition to the government after authorities targeted his Chinese girlfriend. Dahlin's confession was broadcast across China, just like Jiang Tianyong. Dahlin was let go after his video was released. Jiang, however, remains in prison. In California, with her young daughter, Jiang's wife Jean knows the reality of fighting for human rights in Xi Jinping's China. It's so hard, but there is no way out. I don't know how many more years it will be before we can reunite. I have no idea how long this nightmare will continue. Matt Rivers, CNN, Beijing.
A North Korean defector is now being praised for his bravery after his story and the dramatic footage of his daring escape emerged. Our Anna Corrin talks with another defector about the conditions he left behind in North Korea.
You can see him moving at a good rate of speed.
Speeding down a deserted road on the DMZ, a North Korean soldier is attempting something the UN command says no one has ever done before.
You will see some KPA soldiers come out of this building here as the vehicle quickly moves past them.
Using an army jeep, he drives to within meters of the South Korean border, and under a rain of bullets from his own comrades, he runs across the demarcation line, defecting. There have been many defectors, but this is the first one I wanted praise for bravery. He was heroic. I never thought to do this because it's a suicide mission. 32-year-old Kang Ri-hyuk would know. He spent 10 years as an officer in the North Korean People's Army based on the DMZ. And while he thought about defecting, he never imagined pulling off such a daring escape. Instead, he crossed the border into China, made his way to Thailand, and then defected to South Korea 4 years ago. And that's where he met his wife, also a defector, who doesn't want her identity revealed, fearing for the safety of her family back in North Korea. Conditions were harsh. Everyone was hungry, even the soldiers, he says. The UN is sending rice and fertilizer, and it all goes to the ranking officials. There are many soldiers who also die from disease because they're not given medical treatment. The latest defector, the third this year, suffered serious injuries to his arms and abdomen from at least 4 bullet wounds. By the time he was medevaced to hospital, he'd lost more than 50% of his blood and was almost dead. And while surgeons were operating, they discovered dozens of parasitic worms, some up to 27 centimetres long, which doctors say were the result of poor hygiene and malnutrition. Back in the 1990s, famine and starvation plagued North Korea, but the UN says malnutrition is still a major problem. More than 40% of the population is undernourished, and 1 in 4 children face chronic malnutrition. And while North Korean soldiers are generally treated better than civilians, life is still a constant struggle. This exclusive footage obtained by a South Korean Christian mission shows North Korean soldiers physically ploughing the soil instead of using livestock. And here they're foraging through a bird's nest, hunting for chicks, presumably to eat. Pastor Kim Sung-eun, who heads the mission, has rescued hundreds of North Koreans. He says while this footage is bleak, it's not hunger that motivates defectors, but rather the desire for freedom. North Koreans are thirsty for the outside world and frustrated by the reality they face, he explains. Those who defect, including soldiers, are hungry for information and have a strong desire to get out. Kang says he too wanted a better life, especially for his new family. And now working as a journalist, he occasionally broadcasts loudspeaker messages to the North Korean soldiers and has this message for his fellow defector. Congratulations on your defection. Happy South Korea. I wonder if you heard my broadcast and it helped with your decision. I hope we can meet and have a soju. Anna Corin, CNN, Seoul.
Still to come here on CNN Today, preparing for the worst. CNN goes along for the ride as US fighter pilots train in the skies over South Korea. Plus, word that South Korea and the US might consider rescheduling military exercises so they don't conflict with a major sporting event. We'll explain.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And the breaking news is sources are telling the New York Times that lawyers for Michael Flynn have informed US President Donald Trump's legal team that they are no longer able to discuss the special counsel's investigation. The Times reports that could indicate that Flynn is cooperating with prosecutors or negotiating a deal. Questions about Flynn's overseas business dealings have come up amid the special counsel's investigation, and Flynn, of course, was the subject of scrutiny while White House National Security Advisor over calls with the former Russian ambassador to the United States. We are keeping an eye on that still developing story for you. US fighter pilots train every day in the skies over South Korea for a potential conflict with the North. They practice battles in the air, attacking targets on the ground and defending the Kusan Air Base, which would be critical as an operations centre. CNN's Alexandra Field climbed into an F-16 to get the best view of the training.
In a few seconds, we're fully vertical. U.S. Air Force Captain Kyle Miller, call sign Diesel, takes us straight up to 13,000 feet. I'm strapped in the back, straining to stay conscious, feeling the gravity and the weight of it all. That's the commander of the 8th Fighter Wing, Colonel David Shoemaker, and this happens every day, a practice face-off with North Korea.
We practice just some of the basic maneuvers for air-to-air or some of the basic bombing patterns or bombing maneuvers. We also practice the ability to survive and operate on the ground.
Kunsan is the southernmost U.S. airbase in South Korea. It's home to 2 U.S. F-16 fighter jet squadrons. Flying time to North Korea, 12 minutes.
What do the first few hours of a conflict look like here at Kunsan?
Time isn't measured on the clock, it's measured in casualties. And the faster that we can get on the job, the less casualties that we'll see, particularly in Seoul, in the opening volley of that war.
In wartime, Kunsan could expand to up to 4 times the number of servicemen and women currently serving here, an essential seat of U.S. and South Korean operations, and a prime target.
We expect that North Korea is going to target any of our military bases that are here in the South.
What kind of threat could North Korea present to the base here?
So we worry about their short-range ballistic missiles here, and we know that they have chemical weapons at their disposal.
They stay ready to fend off a ground invasion from North Korean special forces and to take the fight north from the air.
Obviously having that air-to-surface capability, being able to take out the long-range artillery that would be bombarding Seoul.
This is the 3rd tour at Kunsan for Colonel Shoemaker. It's undeniably different.
We know that North Korea has advanced in its nuclear capabilities and its missile capabilities. Have you changed the way that you do things at all?
It is a mindset shift of why it is so important and the seriousness with which all of the airmen and soldiers here at Kunsan Air Base take our exercises and our training.
This is Diesel's 3rd flight in 2 days. He puts us on the ground as the sun sets. The supersonic jet now quiet. Its pilot always ready. Alexandra Field, CNN, Kunsan Air Base, South Korea.
Well, South Korea's military is contemplating starting discussions with the US to reschedule military exercises during the Winter Olympics. This, a Korean military source telling Yonhap news agency. It's still not clear if the North is participating in the Games, but the unpredictable nation does seem to be scaring off visitors. Mystical. South Korean magician Yoo Ho-jin rides through Seoul with his snowboard magically strapped to a bus. Organisers of the 2018 Winter Olympics hope such ads will boost ticket sales for the Games. Held at the South Korean alpine resort of Pyeongchang, just 80 kilometres from the demilitarised zone. Rising tensions between the US and North Korea have cast a shadow over the Games. By late October, only a third of tickets had been sold. But there's excitement in South Korea as the Games approach, and many here see this as an attempt to calm tensions on the Korean peninsula. Here's the country's figure skating champion at the UN earlier this month.
Indeed, Pyeongchang represents perhaps the most sincere effort to cross frozen border between South and North and to foster a peaceful environment.
Kim Jong-un has not yet committed to his country's participation. In fact, the North missed the deadline to register, but organisers are willing to make an exception.
Until the very last, February 9th, the last week of January, and the beginning of February, we will be waiting for North Korea's application to participate.
Kim is a sports enthusiast, and some experts believe this may cause him to finally give in and send a team to Pyeongchang. Since he came to power, North Korea has participated in more international sporting events. Simon Cockerell organises frequent tours to the North.
North Korea has been explicit in promoting sports in the last few years, opening more sports academies, trying to send more sports teams abroad, participating in more international competitions.
There was a hero's welcome and banquet with Kim for the North Korean team that won 11 gold medals at the 2014 Asian Games. Organisers hope that Kim draws inspiration from such events and go for a shot at Olympic gold, sending a message of peace that reverberates well beyond the sporting world. And South Korean students took their big university entrance exam on Thursday, a week after it was postponed because of an earthquake along the southeastern coast. The test is a very big deal in South Korea. Police officers escort students through rush hour traffic. The stock market opens an hour late. Public transportation ramped up. Air traffic halted during one part of the exam. And parents pray for their children to succeed. Well, coffee, a devil's brew, or the elixir of life? A new study shows us what those cups of joe can do to or for your health. That's next on CNN Today. The City of Light is living up to its name. Take a look at that. This is a look at the holiday lights in Paris. The trees along the Champs-Élysées sparkling in the cold. Some tourists say it warms their hearts.
It was amazing, magical. There were lights everywhere. It went up all at once. It was amazing.
It represents Christmas, which is on its way, and the cold. We're wrapped up well, and we're happy to be here.
And the Vatican also marking the season in a big way. A 28-metre Christmas tree has arrived all the way from Poland. It won't be lit for another 2 weeks. Russia also getting in the festive mood. Christmas balls adorning the trees near St. Basil's Cathedral. And one mall in Moscow, as you can see there, quite the merry sight already. Well, those holiday lights do look beautiful, but artificial light in general is becoming a global problem. Meteorologist Tom Sater is here to explain. There's just too much of it, Tom.
Too much, and for a good reason. Obviously, population is growing. We need more light. Generationally speaking, you know, in the past, we didn't work 24 hours a day, so there's a lot of night shifts, and there's a need for light. A new study, however, that is using satellite data now that can tell the radiance of Earth. And this is from a German Research Center for Geosciences, saying that 83% of the population of the world cannot see the stars. Light pollution. It's a study that's relatively in its infancy, but we're learning more in the last 5 years. Now, obviously, in the urban sky, everything's getting washed out. Suburban life, we're seeing more and more in the way of light. It isn't just the population, and again, the work habits that have changed. It's the way we're changing our lights. It's the LED lights. That cost-effective, energy-efficient light bulb, sure, it helps. But even with the smaller cities such as Monaco, they're leaving the lights on more. We're using more of those LED lights. This is Salt Lake City. When they have a temperature inversion, it traps that lights. I mean, everything is just getting brighter and brighter. Hong Kong gets the crown for the most light-polluted city in the world by scientists. Our Andrew Stevens, in about 3.5 years ago, did a study in Hong Kong on the light pollution, and he studied the neon lights. But it's now, the study tells us it's more about the LEDs, and it's harming us physically. Insomnia, headaches, migraines. The study goes on to say between 2012 and 2016, that 4-year period, we saw an increase in light pollution at 2.2%. That staggering amount considering what we're going to be looking forward to in the years ahead. LED light use leads to, as mentioned, poor health, disrupted sleep, but there's much more to this too. When you don't sleep well, it leads to more health risks. A Harvard study said that women who live in well-lit or overlit cities have a higher risk for developing breast cancer. Impacts to birds and migration, they need the darkness. Take a look at Milan here, Michael. This is interesting. They changed the lights. There's a temperature difference of the LED lights in the center core of the city than elsewhere. So we are brightening up, and we're not doing anything correctly. We need to change the lamps because we're just taking out the old sodium lamps and we're putting in the LEDs, but it's really all about direction. So interesting study to say the least, and of course with the holidays around, no doubt we're going to be looking at more light pollution.
Indeed, we are, yeah, especially your house. I hear you light it up.
Absolutely,
well,
yeah.
like
so that's the hustle and bustle. You're not going to get sleep anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Enjoy
exactly. Good to see you, Tom.
You too.
Well, 3 to 4 cups of coffee a day will give you not just a caffeine buzz, but apparently better overall health. Research published this week in the British Medical Journal shows coffee drinkers live longer, healthier lives than those who shun the Java. Coffee consumers are less likely to die prematurely, apparently, and less likely to develop heart disease, diabetes, cirrhosis, or cancer. Scientists have yet to confirm what it is about coffee that is helping people. Just don't drink your coffee around bright lights. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm Michael Holmes. More of CNN Today in 15 minutes. World Sport with the one and only Vince Cellini, who's going to come in from over there any sec. There he is. He's going to be here with World Sport. How you doing, mate?